My dear students of class 10, today I shall read the text from lesson number 3. The text is The Passing Away of Bapu. Everybody knows who Bapu is. Bapu is none other than the father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, who had a leading contribution to the independence of India, and he was popularly known as Bapu, Bapuji or Bapu. This text has been written by Nayantara Sehgal. Nayantara Sehgal is one of the first female Indian writers in English. You know that there are so many Indian writers who have great contribution so far to the English literature. Nayantara Sehgal is one of those writers who have enriched English literature to some extent. The text, The Passing Away of Bapu, written by Nayantara Sehgal, is an extract from her memoir, Prison and Chocolate Cake. Memoir is a type of writing that is written on one's recollection of some happenings. And this text, Nayantara Sehgal's The Passing Away of Bapu, is taken from a memoir written by Nayantara Sehgal, which is entitled as Prison and Chocolate Cake. And this memoir, Prison and Chocolate Cake, recounts or recollects or memorizes the incidents following the death of Gandhiji. You know, Gandhiji was killed and his death was political. He was killed when he was on his way to a prayer meeting. And Gandhiji, when Gandhiji was killed, I hope you can imagine what was felt by every Indian at that moment and the moments afterwards. Now, Nayantara Sehgal has narrated what happened afterwards. What happened after Gandhiji was killed in her memoir, Prison and Chocolate Cake. And The Passing Away of Bapu is a chapter from that book, that memoir, Prison and Chocolate Cake. So this text vividly describes not only the author's personal sense of loss, but also the collective grief of the entire nation at the passing away of Mahatma Gandhi. It was obvious that Nayantara Sehgal felt a personal loss over the death of Gandhiji. She also has described her feelings over the death of Gandhiji side by side. The collective grief or the accumulated grief of the entire nation or the people of India. Now, this text, the passing away of Bapu, has been divided in 3 units in your textbook, and today I shall read for you Unit 1. I was having tea at home on the evening of 30th January 1948. Everybody knows that 30th January 1948. Everybody knows that 30th January is a very shocking day for the Indians. And the year was 1948. 30th January of 1948. The date was a black day for Indians. The blackest day in the Indian history. On that day, Gandhiji was killed. Now, in the evening of 30th January, when Noyantara Sehgal was having tea or taking tea at home, when I was called to Birla House by an urgent telephone, she got an urgent telephone when she was taking tea at her own home. She was immediately called to Birla House. Birla House, you know, Birla House is located in Delhi. Gandhiji had been shot on his way to a prayer meeting. Over telephone, she was informed that Gandhiji has been shot. Gandhiji had been shot when he was on his way to a prayer meeting as usual. So, Noyantara Sehgal was called to Birla House because Gandhiji was killed. She was called by her associates immediately to come immediately to Birla House as Gandhiji was killed. Gandhiji was shot, not killed that time, but was shot. I was numb with shock as I got into the car. Now, what did she feel at that moment when she got the telephone? When she got the information that their Bapu was shot on his way to a prayer meeting, she was numb with shock. As I got into the car, getting that information, when she immediately rushed to get into the car, she was numb. She was moveless. She was speechless with the shock. So she was greatly shocked. At the Birla House, Gandhiji's relatives and followers had gathered round his body. When she got to the Birla House, she found that Gandhiji's relatives and followers had gathered round his body. His body lay in the middle of the room of the Birla House, and around his body There were his followers, his relatives. There was silence in the room as Gandhiji breathed his last. Now, in the Birla house, Gandhiji breathed his last. Gandhiji passed away. Gandhiji died. And there was absolute silence in the room. Nobody could speak at all. Words of Bapu's death had spread through Delhi like a flame fanned by wind. And that news spread so rapidly across the country and obviously spread through Delhi like a flame fanned by the wind. If a flame is charged by wind, the flame spreads so rapidly. Similarly, Gandhiji's death news, the news of Gandhiji's passing away, spread so rapidly through Delhi. Sad groups of men and women had collected around Birla House. There were so many people, irrespective of men and women, had collected around Birla House. They were all grieved. Out of every window, one could see a brown blur of faces. From every window of the Birla House, it was being noticed that there was a face. There were so many brown faces. Brown is the complexion of Indian people. There were so many faces that could be seen from every window that no face was being distinctively identified. Just there was brownish just the brown color of the faces was being visible. They did not make a sound. They were speechless. They were stunned. So they were so stunned that they could not speak at all. There was an unnatural silence, unbelievable silence. The silence couldn't be imagined at all. Such a silence prevailed at that moment that it was beyond imagination. It was as if time stood still for those few minutes. It was being felt, as was being felt by Nantara Sehgal, that time stood still for those few minutes. The people were too stunned to speak in the beginning. In the beginning, the people lost their power of speaking, their power of speech. Later, they clamored wildly, shouting and crying. Now, after a few while, the people started demanding desperately. Clamored means demanded loudly or desperately. The people started desperate demand or demanding desperately with shouts and cries. So the people burst into desperate shouting and crying after a few while. With the demands, what was their demand? Obviously, their demand was who had killed their Bapu must be punished, must be hanged. They jostled one another in a stampede to break into the house. The people were so desperate to break into the Birla house that they pushed one another unintentionally, unwillingly. They forced one's way by pushing, Jostle means forced one's way by pushing. They calmed a little when it was announced that they would be allowed to see Gandhiji before the funeral. Now they calmed a little. They got a little calm when it was announced for everybody, for all in general, that they would be allowed to see Gandhiji before his last rites. Funeral, the religious activities that are maintained on someone's death. When one is faced with the shock of a loved one's death, one whimpers, what will become of me now that he has left me? Now, as Noyantara Sehgal has observed, everybody at that moment, everybody was with great shock. Everybody's face was filled with shock over their over the death of the father of nation. And someone whimpers, as was observed by Noyantara Sehgal. Someone, that means some people or many people. Hmm. Obviously, there were many people who were whimpering. Whimper means makes low and crying noises. There were so many people whose faces were, innumerable people, countless people whose faces were filled with shock. There was the signs of shock on their faces, a reflection of shock on their faces. And there were so many people or countless people who were whimpering at that moment by uttering, what will become of me now that he has left me? This utterance is obviously significant, and this signifies that everybody, over the death of Gandhiji, everybody feels his or her personal loss. Everybody feels his or her personal loss. This was sorely the question uppermost in the mind of owning people. Now, that question was so significant, and that question grew in the mind of almost everybody or every Indian at that moment, who were the people who were too much mourning or shocking. They looked like lost children. They seemed to be lost children, or as if they had lost their guardian. It was a question in many of our hearts as we sat, still shocked and unbelieving. Now, that question was also, as was felt by Noyantara Sehgal, that question was also within their hearts, within the hearts of Noyantara Sehgal personally and her associates, when they sat there and when they sat still shocked and unbelieving. They couldn't believe at all that Gandhiji was no more. We listened to the broadcast telling the people of India that their Bapu was no more. Now, finally, through broadcast, it was announced for the people of India, or it was officially announced by broadcast, that their Bapu was no more. So this part of the text, and obviously the other parts of the text, the remaining two units, are about what Indians felt over the passing away of Bapu. Now, students, I hope that you have understood what I have, or how I have analyzed this text, and I hope that you will read the text thoroughly, and then the text will be clearer to you, and you will also feel by yourself how Indians felt at the moment when Gandhiji was killed. Okay, goodbye.